Hey everybody, it's Captain Nabs here with you once again, and we're going to continue today in our ongoing series of videos of how to get started in the VATSIM network. I know some people are very hesitant and shy at the idea of talking to real live ATC. A lot of you know that VATSIM is a fairly professional level network. People take what they do in VATSIM pretty seriously, but they also do it for fun, and I'd love you to get out there and get into the network and try it for yourselves. You'll probably learn a lot. It might be a little bit scary at first, but that's what these videos are here for, is to help kind of teach you some of the most basic things you need to know to go flying on the VATSIM network, and hopefully not make too much of a fool of yourself the first time you go out there and do it. So today we're going to do something very simple. We're going to take a Cessna 172 and we're going to fly what's called a circuit around an airport. The circuit, or the traffic pattern as it's known in the United States, is a rectangular pattern that's flown around any active runway at any airport in the world. It's flown the same way in all sorts of different countries, so pilots everywhere should be very familiar with this pattern. The circuit is made up of 5 legs. The first leg, when you take off, is called the upwind. You fly straight ahead until you reach 500 feet above the airport elevation. At 500 feet above the runway, you'll start a 90-degree left turn onto what's called the crosswind leg, perpendicular to the active runway. You'll continue climbing on the crosswind leg until you reach 1,000 feet above the airport. At 1,000 feet, you'll then make another 90-degree left turn onto what's known as the downwind. The downwind is then flown level at 1,000 feet above the runway. The distance varies depending on the type of aircraft. The larger the aircraft, the larger the circuit. Generally, light aircraft will be a half to 1 mile away from the circuit. One of the goals being that in this light single-engine aircraft, if the engine fails at any point in time, you should be able to turn to and land on that runway. The downwind will continue until you reach a point where you're basically about 45 degrees past the end of the runway, where you'll then start another 90-degree left turn onto what's called the base. As you start this left turn, you're also going to start descending so that on the base you reach about 500 feet just as you're ready to turn onto the last leg, the final leg. Circuit patterns are normally flown left-hand with all left-hand turns. However, sometimes they will be flown right-hand depending on the situation around the airport. Depending on other active runways, terrain, noise abatement, airspace, or any other reason, a certain airport or a certain runway may have right-hand circuits. They are flown exactly the same way, but with all turns right-hand instead of left-hand. The purpose of the circuit pattern is to help pilots practice and get better at takeoffs and landings and maneuvering the aircraft around the airport. For VATSIM, that's also going to help you practice with your ATC skills. Becoming familiar with the circuit is a very useful skill for any pilot, as any time you fly VFR in and out of an airport, you may be asked to fly part of this circuit pattern to set yourself up for landing. You may also be given information about traffic on various legs of the circuit, so understanding all these basic terms and legs will help you understand where to look for other airplanes around the airport. Now, one of the most important things you've got to realize about VATSIM is that it is made up completely of volunteers. No one is paid to participate. The controllers, just like the pilots, are all volunteers doing this for fun in their spare time. So there will always be a limited number of controllers available. They'll control whenever they feel like they can get some time online, but most airports are not going to be staffed 24/7. So how do you find an airport with an air traffic controller so that you can practice actually talking to someone on the VATSIM network? Well, that's a great question, and there's a few good tools out there to help you find where is there ATC on the VATSIM network. So one of them is the official VATSIM map, live map, which is at map.vatsim.net, and it's a live map of what's happening in the VATSIM network. It's updated about once every minute or so. This one just shows basically airplanes. Whenever there's a large number of airplanes together, they're grouped as a number. If you zoom in a little bit on those areas, it'll actually show you all the individual airplanes in those areas. Now, one thing you'll notice here, of course, on the default map is that there's just airplanes and no ATC. There's a whole sub-menu here on the side where you can turn on ATC and see where there are controllers online. There's a number of different sources that you can use in addition to the official map. There's also a great standalone desktop program called VATSPI. This is VATSIM right here. VATSIM is basically, it's a very similar program. It shows everything happening around the world on the network. What you'll notice right now is that for the time of day that I'm online, it's kind of in the later evening here in North America, and you'll see that most activity is generally in North America. You can see all the black airplanes here are mostly located in North America. Generally, people get online in this network in their area in the afternoon and the evening when they have free time after work. So that's when you're going to generally see ATC coverage in most areas. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit on North America here, and let's see what we can find here. So in addition to, of course, airplanes flying around, what you'll also notice is various kinds of air traffic control available. So these large areas here are called area control centers. This one controller here will control this whole area except where there might be other ATC controllers on below him, but he'll cover a large area. These are en route centers. If you're not sure if you're within their boundaries, you can always send a message to them once you're on the network and ask. As we zoom in a little bit here, in case of Toronto here, it's actually showing us a great selection here. So as well as the en route control center, there's also an approach departure controller online here around Toronto. You'll see there's also one here in Montreal. So these circles usually are approach departure radar controllers. And then as you get closer to the airports, you'll see that actually at the airport there's a number of letters, and these letters stand for the different positions that are manned at that airport, starting with clearance delivery, ground, tower, and an ATIS, which is an automated weather report available at the airport. So these are all the controllers that are online in Toronto right now. If you go to another airport, you'll see there's just a G here in Ottawa. There's a ground controller here in Ottawa. In Montreal, there's no separate local controller. There is an ATIS, an information broadcast that's being run by the same person who is actually logged on as the terminal. So they're also doing that broadcast there. So what we're looking for today is a relatively quiet airport where we can do some practice. So one I noticed what was online, and I think will be a great place to do some practice here, is Chicago Midway, KMDW. You'll see there's a ground, a tower, and an ATIS online. So we'll get to practice a little bit with all those. In the top-down system, if you don't see a local controller online, but you do see maybe an approach or an en route controller online, they control any airports that are not controlled directly by a control tower. So if someone comes on and logs on the tower, then they control that airport. But if, let's say, like DuPage here, where there is no tower or ground controller, then the overlying controller, in this case probably the Chicago approach controller, will be in charge there. Anytime you're unsure of whether or not a controller has jurisdiction, as soon as you log into the network, just ask. Controllers will be happy to tell you whether or not they have control of a certain airport. They'd rather have you ask and they tell you that, no, I don't actually control that airport, than have you pop up and try to take off somewhere where maybe they do have control. So if in doubt, ask any controller that might be around that you might think controls that airport, and they'll tell you whether or not to talk to them on the radio, or whether or not the airport is currently uncontrolled. As you can see right now, if I zoom out, several areas around this are uncontrolled. There's a few areas that are controlled today, and there's a few that are not. So we're going to go ahead and get ourselves set up for a flight out of Chicago Midway. So the one thing, of course, you want to do when you're selecting the airport to fly at is to not go with the default position, which is to start at the active runway, as has been emphasized before. Never log into VATSIM on an active runway or taxiway. Pick a parking spot somewhere at the airport. If you're an airliner, you'll probably pick a gate. If you're just flying a Cessna 172, then look for something called parking. Somewhere, anywhere, you might find a parking spot that you can use. So I'm just picking one at random, parking number 43 today in Midway. Because we're just going to be doing circuits, which is a pattern around this one airport, we don't have to have a destination. We're just going to take off and land at the same airport here. Now, before we get started, we're just going to talk briefly about the altimeter here, because this is pretty important when you're flying, and especially when you're flying online, it's important that you can maintain altitude correctly. So if you're looking at one of these old-fashioned altimeters here, from what they call the steam gauges days, it works a lot like a clock. The big hand is hundreds, the little hand is thousands. So right here, sitting here, the little hand is between 0 and 1, so that means we're between 0 and 1,000 feet above sea level. And the big hand is just past the 6, so that means we're just above 600 feet. According to this, we're about 610 feet right now. However, as air pressures change, as weather systems come and go, the altimeters will not always be correct, because they rely on the air pressure outside the airplane to tell you how high you are above the ground. So as the as the systems come and go, the air pressure will change, and ATC will normally give you an up-to-date setting for your altimeter. In North America, it's going to be in inches of mercury, which is this little dial here on the right, and right now it's set to the standard setting of 29.92. 29.92, if you can imagine all those little lines in there, about 2/10 of, or 2/100ths of an inch. Normally, when you talk to ATC, one of the first things they'll do is they'll give you the current altimeter setting, or you can get it with the airport information. So what I found out here is that the altimeter setting is actually about 2993. So now you'll see I've actually set it to be 29.93, and it's actually now a little bit more accurate. It's at about 620 feet. So when you get a setting from ATC, make sure you set it here in the altimeter, assuming you have live weather. VATSIM operates in a live weather system. However, VATSIM doesn't send information to your simulator about the weather itself. The controllers will give you the weather they have, but the simulator itself is responsible for the weather. So make sure that if you want to fly on VATSIM, it's best to be in live weather mode in the Microsoft Flight Simulator world, and this will usually get you pretty accurate clouds, winds, and altimeter settings. One other thing we're going to need to talk about before we get going here is the transponder. So this is the transponder down here in the 172. It's at the bottom of the radio stack. It's a very special radio that sends out signals specifically to the radar system so that ATC can identify you and see what altitude you're at. So right now it's here in off. I'm going to go ahead and turn it all the way on. There are two on modes for most transponders. There's usually on, and then there's also altitude mode. In on mode, you only transmit the special 4-digit code to ATC. In altitude mode, you transmit your 4-digit code, but you also transmit your altitude. So most of the time, you might as well run it in altitude mode because that's going to be what's useful to ATC. The altitude here is always indicated in hundreds of feet. ATC is only ever going to know how high you are in the nearest hundreds of feet. So we're at 600 feet, as we said on the altimeter, and you'll see that that matches over here. This is in hundreds, so 006 is 600 feet. If it was 060, it would be 6,000. If it was 600, it would be 60,000. So this is tens of thousands, thousands, and hundreds of feet. You'll also see that every transponder has a 4-digit code. This 1200 code that's in here right now is the default VFR code for any aircraft that's operating VFR. If you don't have a code assigned by ATC, set this code until ATC gives you a specific code. If they give you a specific code, they'll use the phrase squawk. So they'll say squawk 5112. And so you would type in the code 5112. And as soon as you've typed in all 4 digits, now it's transmitting this code, and ATC will know who you are on the radar because you're the only one with this special code. Something else ATC may ask you to do with the transponder besides squawking and new code is they may ask you to squawk ident. There's an ident function for every transponder. What the ident function does is it basically for about 6 to 10 seconds sends a special signal to the radar computer that makes your target flash on their screen for about 10 seconds. That way it makes it much easier when a controller is not sure who you are and where you are for them to figure out who you are when you're first calling them up. So oftentimes when you're first talking to ATC, they'll ask you to squawk a new code, and they may ask you to squawk ident just to help find you on their radar system. So anything with the word squawk usually means talking about the transponder. One important thing I do have to tell you about with Microsoft Flight Simulator and this transponder is that right now this transponder does not interface properly with the vPilot client. So right now if I go ahead and turn this all the way off, what you'll notice on here is that my mode C, which is the altitude mode, does not turn off. I can turn it off manually, but I cannot turn it on, but it doesn't go on when I turn on the transponder. Likewise, if I go in here and turn this transponder back on and all the way to altitude mode, you'll notice again the mode C does not go on automatically. This is supposed to happen, and when Microsoft finishes properly developing the SDK, the software development kit for Microsoft Flight Simulator, this will all work properly. You'll also note if I push the ident button that it does not light up the ident signal here in the client. So for now, you're going to have to activate your transponder using the client. So make sure you turn it on before you take off. Make sure that you press this ident button if ATC asks you to ident. If they ask you to squawk mode Charlie, that's what this means. It means turn your transponder on into mode Charlie, into altitude mode. It means it's not being transmitted properly. So always double check your client to make sure that it is doing what you want on the transponder. The numbers will work correctly, but changing modes does not work correctly yet. Hopefully that'll be fixed soon. Alright, so we're here at Chicago Midway in our Cessna 172. We are definitely not parked on any runway or taxiway. We're just parked a little out of the way parking spot, so we can go ahead and connect to the VATSIM network. If you're not sure how to use vPilot, you can go back to my previous video where I explain how to use vPilot. But we're going to press connect, and we're going to go and make sure we have the call sign that we're happy with. This is the call sign I'm going to be operating under today, Charlie November Alpha Bravo Sierra, and type is a Cessna 172. So I hit connect, and you'll see immediately a whole bunch of controllers pop on. It takes a couple seconds for information about all the different controllers to be transferred to your client, so give it a couple seconds. While you're waiting for that, what we can also do here today is file a flight plan. So a flight plan is basically just that. It's an explanation of what we plan to do today while we're flying in on the network. So this is a flight plan that's left over from a previous time that I did it. I'm just going to clear it straight out. So today we're going to be doing a VFR flight. This is visual flight rules. We're going to be flying around primarily by looking out the window. We're not going to be navigating using our instruments. We're just going to be flying around an airport and just looking out the window. So visual flight rules. The key is the visual word, which means we're just going to look out the window. We're going to navigate by looking out the window. We're going to fly the airplane looking out the window. We're going to type in the airport. It's very important that you type in the correct departure airport so that it correctly gets sent to the correct ATC for that airport. You should always specify destination, and if you're going to the same airport, just put it in as the same airport. That way the controllers will know what you're doing. A lot of this other stuff is not particularly important. Departure time is not super critical, or time en route, especially because we're just doing circuits. Fuel available, we have about half tank, so I think that'll give us about 2 hours, and the cruise speed of this thing, we'll say in the circuit, is about 90 knots. We're also going to go up to about 1,500 feet here. Route, just going to type in exactly what we're going to do. If you were flying a route to a specific location, you might type in the waypoints that you're going to fly. In this case, we're just doing circuits at this airport, or pattern work. So you can write circuits, you can write pattern, you can write traffic patterns, whatever you want, just something so that the controller who looks at this will know what you're planning to do. Remarks are just that. They're kind of a miscellaneous area where you can type all sorts of things that may be relevant for the controller to know. If you're new to VATSIM, please don't be afraid to put it down here. Go ahead and put new to VATSIM or something like that. Rookie, whatever you want to write. But this just lets the controllers know that you are new to the network, that you might be unfamiliar with procedures, and rather than criticize you right away for doing something wrong, they'll gladly offer some helpful hints along the way if you make any mistakes. So when you're new, don't hesitate to put it in there. Controllers will appreciate that. They were new once upon a time too, and they'll gladly help you try to get going. The other thing you'll need to fill out down here at the bottom is your voice status. So if you, like me, have a headset and you can and want to communicate sending and receiving via voice, then you would click that box. If you maybe have speakers but no microphone, you can receive only, and then you have to reply by text, but you can receive voice communication from ATC, or you may want to do both directions just by text only. So whichever one of these you want, pick one, and that'll be your status, and then ATC will also, again, know how to treat you. Once you're happy with everything here, you can hit File Flight Plan, and you'll see it says Flight Plan Filed. So all that information I filled in just went back to the server. If I open the window again, I can change anything I want and refile it. I can hit File Flight Plan again after changing anything I want to make sure that if I have any changes that I want to make to my flight plan, I can do it very easily myself. Now the controller is going to know exactly what we want to do as soon as we call them up. We don't have to explain everything we're going to do to them. And it also helps them just with tracking aircraft, knowing what to expect when they see these flight plans, even before you call them. They kind of have an idea of what to plan for you. So that took a lot longer than I expected to explain all these topics that are very important for you to be aware of before you start flying on VATSIM. So I'm actually going to end this video right here, but please watch the second video. It should appear hopefully next in your list here, and that will literally be us starting the airplane, talking to ATC, and taking off and flying the circuit and doing all the stuff we just talked about. So we finished the big pre-flight briefing. Now it's a matter of actually let's go out there and do it. So please join me for part 2, and hopefully you'll get out there, get some confidence, and fly on the VATSIM network yourself. I look forward to seeing you out there, and we'll see you in the next video.